Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kim Wang-deok from the Science and Technology Policy Institute. I would like to extend my warm welcome to all of you for coming to the session. I would like to make some housekeeping announcements before we begin the session. We are hosting the session both online and offline. You may watch the session on the YouTube platform. For those who are participating from overseas, we provide simultaneous interpretation in Korean and English. Once again, I would like to express my gratitude to all of the participants. Now, let us begin the session on science and technology. As part of the Global Korea Convention 2020, President Jo Hwang-hee was supposed to deliver the opening remarks, but he's now on his way after attending a meeting presided over by the Prime Minister. So I'm going to invite Professor Kim Eun-mi, who will be the next president of Ewha Women's University, for congratulatory remarks. She is a member of the UN GSDR. She is one of the 15 independent expert authors that are working on the Sustainable Development Report. Please welcome her with a big round of applause. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Professor Kim Eun-mi at the Ewha Women's University. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my warm welcome to all of you and congratulations in the hosting of the session on science and technology. The Global Korea Convention 2020 is organized by NRC. I would like to express my gratitude to President Jo Hwang-hee of Science and Technology Policy Institute for organizing this session and inviting me to this meeting. So Hoon-seop from World Bank Korea, as well as Son In-kyung from STI, Lee Jong-il from the Korea Society for Innovation, Management and Economics, Professor Kwak Kyung-ryul from KAIST, Mr. Han Jun-hee from the Ministry of Science and ICT, Professor Lee Jin-sang from Sony Korea, as well as Mr. Park Hwan-il from STEPI for their presentations and discussion. I would also like to express my thanks to the online audience. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the SDGs are becoming even more important. We want to promote sustainable development in our economy and society. And once again, we can see that we need to manage our environment so that there will be coexistence and joint peace between the humanity and nature. This is very much in line with the Asian philosophy. The advanced countries are located in the northern hemisphere, and there is a high level of STI, science and technology and innovation. This has to be provided to the developing world so that we can address many different environmental challenges as well as climate crisis. And this is a key policy message that we need to keep in mind. The COVID-19 pandemic is spreading across the borders, and there are many natural disasters and climate-related disasters, and we need to respond to them. And in order to do so, we need to promote international cooperation and coordination. This means that we need to make sure that international organizations play a key part in promoting multilateral governance, and Korea has to play a key role in this endeavor. Second, as with many other advanced countries, Korea is responsible for providing ODA for sustainable development. We had some infectious disease outbreaks such as SARS and MERS, which were limited to the developing world, but this COVID-19 pandemic is inflicting pains on both developed and developing countries. And as a result, the COVID-19 has disrupted global trade and exchanges. And as a result, many countries are focusing on addressing their own problems, and as a result, international cooperation has been put on the back burner, which is quite unfortunate. Therefore, advanced countries, including Korea, need to strengthen international cooperation. Otherwise, next year in 2021, we may witness more frequent occurrences of wars and conflicts and natural disasters across the world. In that sense, this session is very timely and appropriate. Third, there is information gap between countries and within countries. We need to address the digital divide, where there is an unequal access to technology and innovation. Developed countries need to provide ODA for developing countries for capacity building. In particular, the least developed countries, vulnerable countries, small island developing countries need to be their priority. Also, we need to pay attention to helping women, children, and young people so that they can have better access to technology and science. And finally, I'd like to make this recommendation to the Korean government. The Korean government has been working hard to achieve SDGs, but we still have a very long way to go. The second basic plan for international development assistance does not include science and technology. In the next comprehensive plan for ODA, I hope that CTS program of KOICA and other technology-based projects need to be carried out in a sustainable manner, and science and joint research need to be included, but there should be more inclusion of science and technology. Considering that Korea is an advanced country with excellent ICT and a member of OECD DAC, it is quite unfortunate. I hope that there will be more inclusion of science, technology, and innovation in the ODAs so that there will be more budget and resources allocated for this cause. And I believe that this session can provide a momentum in going in that direction. I wish the success of this session. Once again, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this very important session. I wish all of you good health and happiness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Next, we would like to invite the keynote presentation, Mr. So-Hoon-Sup of World Bank Korea. He was not able to join us in person, so he will meet us via the online platform. Please take a look at the screen.
지식 교환 및 기술
Knowledge
지원을
sharing
위한
and
새로운
technology
글로벌 플랫폼을
support
구축했습니다.
is what we need to do
한국으로부터의
through
교훈을
our
통해
new
이
platform.
플랫폼은
Based on the
혁신과
lessons from
기술의 사용을
Korea, this
강조하고 있습니다.
platform
저희
emphasizes the utilization
한국
of
사무소는 팬데믹
innovation
이후의
and
회복을
technology.
촉진.
World Bank Korea.
안녕하세요. 세계은행그룹
Good
한국사무소
morning.
소훈섭 소장입니다.
I am So-Hoon-Sup
먼저
of
글로벌
World
코리아
Bank Korea
박람회에서
office.
과학기술정책연구원이 주관하는
First of all, I would like
세션에
to
발표할
take
수
this
있는 기회를
opportunity
갖게 되어
to thank
기쁘게
you for this
생각합니다.
invitation to
이런
speak at
유의미한 자리를 만들어주신
the STI session.
과기정통부와
Thank you very much to the Ministry of Science and ICT, STEPI, and all participating organizations for this opportunity.
오늘 저는 SDG와
Today, I would like
혁신기술의
to
역할에
talk to
대해
you about the role
발표하겠습니다.
of
먼저 SDG와 세계은행의
SDGs
트윈
and
goals,
the
즉
innovation.
두 가지
We
목표라고
have twin
불리는
goals.
세계은행그룹
First
목표에
of
대해
all, we
말씀드리고
have the goals
SDG
of the
목표
World Bank,
달성에
and
과학, 혁신기술
let's take a
그리고
look
그린
at the role of
이노베이션의 중요성에
STIs
대해
for the
말씀드리고자
achievement
합니다.
of SDGs.
마지막으로 SDG를 위해
And I would like to
세계은행과
also
한국 간의
talk to you
협력을
about the
비롯한
partnership
국제협력의
between
중요성에
World
대해
Bank and Korea,
강조하는 것으로
as well as the
마무리하도록
necessity for
하겠습니다.
international cooperation for the
2015년에
achievement of
유엔의
SDGs.
회원국들은 17가지
The UN member states have agreed on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
채택했습니다.
They have been
이
adopted by the UN
SDG는
General Assembly.
빈곤
These
종식을 위해서
SDGs
포용적이고
are
지속
calling
가능하며
for
회복력
inclusive,
있는 성장을
sustainable,
위해
and
과학적인
resilient
접근이
development
필요하다는데
for the eradication of poverty.
인식을 같이
This is a
했다는 점을
recognition by the
보여주고 있습니다.
international community for the necessity.
교육, 불평등
Health,
해소,
education,
그리고
inequality,
경제성장, 기후변화
economic
문제
growth,
해결,
climate
해양과
change,
산림의 보호를 위해서
and the
국제사회의
protection
공동
of
대처가
forestry
필요하다는 것을
are the
인지하고
areas where international
SDG를 통해
cooperation is
전
necessary.
세계는
This has been recognized by the UN member states, and through the SDGs, the whole world agreed to eradicate poverty by
SDG는 또한
2030.
세계은행그룹의
SDGs
두 가지 목표와도
are also
정확히
closely
일치합니다.
linked to the two
세계은행그룹의
goals
두
of the
가지
World
목표,
Bank.
즉
We have two
트윈
missions.
골은
They are called
지속
the
가능한
twin goals.
방식으로
One,
첫째, 극빈곤
in a
퇴치,
sustainable way
그리고
to
두
eradicate
번째로
poverty,
공동
and
번영
also in a
증진입니다.
sustainable way to promote
17가지의
shared
SDG
prosperity.
목표 중
The 17 SDGs
극빈곤을 종식한다는 것은 최우선 목표이고
the extreme
이것은
eradication of extreme
세계은행그룹의
poverty
첫
as the
번째
highest
목표이기도
priority,
합니다.
and this is the
빈곤
highest goal
퇴치와
for the
SDG
World Bank as well.
목표들을 달성하는 길은
Achieving the
당연히
eradication of poverty
쉽지만은
and
않은데요.
SDGs are definitely
잘하는
not an easy
사람들이
feat.
아직도 극심한
But
빈곤
there
속에서
are so
살아가고
many
있습니다.
people living in extreme poverty
세계은행이
even
6월
now.
발표한 세계
According to
경제
the
전망
World
보고서에
Economic
따르면
Prospects announced by the World Bank
2020년에
in
글로벌
June,
경제가
in
마이너스
2020,
5.2%
the global
성장률이
economy will
예상됩니다.
decrease by
지난
5% on the
20년간
average.
지속적으로
During the last
감소했던
20
글로벌
years,
빈곤율은
poverty rates of
2020년
the world
코로나로 인해
continued to
증가할
decrease,
전망입니다.
but we predict that it will increase once again this year due
추가적으로
to
1억 명의
COVID-19.
빈곤 인구가 발생하게
Unfortunately,
됩니다.
we will have
SDG를
100 million
지원하는
more
것이
people in
곧
poverty this year.
경제 불안을
Supporting
극복하고
SDGs is
빈곤에 처한
equal
인구를
to
지원하는
overcoming
길입니다.
economic
특히
difficulties and supporting
SDG를
those
지원하기
in poverty.
위해서는
In order to
개발
support the
도상국들이 지속
SDGs,
가능한 개발을
developing
위해
countries
혁신과
must
기술을 활용할 수
introduce
있도록 돕는
innovation
것이
and
대단히
technology for
중요하다고
sustainable
생각합니다.
growth. I believe that that is very important.
화면에 보이는 그림은
What you
아프리카
see on the
지부티라는 나라의 가난한
is
이민자들이
Djibouti
바닷가에서
Africa.
휴대폰 수신이 가능한 위치를
Poor
찾는
migrant
장면입니다.
workers are trying to
이런
look for an
빈곤자들이
internet
처한
connection
디지털
by the sea.
격차에서
So you
디지털
can see
경제의
the
혜택,
digital divide.
즉 배당을 받을 수
Given
있는
this digital
세상으로
divide,
발전해야
we
합니다.
need to make sure
We
that
need to
all
move
people
from
have
digital
access to
divide to
digital
digital dividends. 이 혁신 기술 어젠다를
technologies, which means that
세계은행에서
we need to move from the digital
disruptive
divide to
technologies
digital
agenda,
dividends.
즉
We call
와해성
this the
기술이라고
destructive
부릅니다.
technology
간단하게
agenda
혁신
at the World
기술이라고
Bank.
부르겠습니다.
In a nutshell, it
혁신
could be
기술은
called
UN
innovative
SDG와
technologies.
세계은행의 빈곤 퇴치
Innovative
목표 달성을
technologies are
가속할 수 있는
essential to accelerating the
경제적,
achievement
사회적
of the
전환을 가져올 수
eradication of
있습니다.
poverty
기술의 진보는
set as a goal
경제
by
성장,
World
시민
Bank.
참여, 그리고 일자리 창출의
Economic growth,
원동력입니다.
job creation, and
혁신
civic
기술은
participation can be
개도국들이 몇
propelled by
단계씩 개발
innovation.
단계를 뛰어넘을 수 있는 기회를
Innovation and
제공합니다.
STIs
아프리카
will
국가들은
enable developing
유선
countries to
전화의
take
일반화
leaps
단계를
forward.
거치지 않고
The African
바로
countries
모바일
can go
네트워크로
past
가고
wire
있습니다.
telephones and
개도국들은
move
이런
to mobile
식으로
phones.
혁신 기술을
By doing
활용해서
so, by
개발 단계를
utilizing
뛰어넘을
innovative
기회를
technologies,
모색하고
developing
있습니다.
countries are looking to
기술의
take
확산은
leaps
점점
forward
가속화되고
to
있습니다.
go past the steps in
전기는
between.
30년, 전화기는
Electricity took
25년이
30
걸려서
years and
겨우
telephone took 20
10%의
years
인구에게
to achieve
보급되었는데
10%
타블렛
penetration,
기기는 5년도
but
채
tablet
걸리지
PCs
않았습니다.
took less than 5
추가로
years.
전화기가 40%의 사용률을 달성하는 데에는
Telephones
39년,
took 39
그리고
years
모두가 사용하는 보편화된
for 40%
단계까지는
penetration
15년이
and
추가로
15
걸린 데
additional
비해서
years for full
스마트폰은 10년
penetration.
안에
But
인구의
smartphones
40%가
actually achieved
사용하게
40%
되었죠.
penetration in
디지털
10
기술은
years.
특히
Digital
세계 경제와
technologies,
정부
especially
그리고 사회의
given the
다양한
world
측면을
economy
재형성하고
and the
개발에도
digital
새로운 길을
technologies
제시하고
available,
있습니다.
can set the new vision for a new path
팬데믹은
of
이러한
growth.
디지털화를
COVID-19
가속화할
pandemic
전망입니다.
will accelerate
다시
such
말하면
digitization.
디지털 기술로
In other
인하여
words, thanks
정부와
to
기업이
digital
사회적
technologies,
거리두기와 비즈니스
we
연속성을
see
동시에
that
유지할 수
we were
있고
able to continue
코로나로
business
인한
as
서비스
is
중단도
while
방지할
maintaining
수
social
있습니다.
distance. We were able to work remotely
전자상거래,
thanks to digital
보건,
technology,
금융, 그리고
e-commerce,
공공서비스나
finance, public
필수품
service,
제공을
education,
포함한
and the
광범위한
provision
분야에서
of
국경에
necessary
구애받지 않고
products were
디지털
possible
보급이
regardless of
가능해졌습니다.
border
한국은
via the
디지털
digital
데이터에
platform.
근거한
Korea
효과적 코로나 대응으로
has
과도한 거리 두기를
been
면할 수 있었고
able
덕분에
to
경제적
overcome
타격을
COVID-19
최소화해서
with
세계의
minimal
관심을
economic
받고
impact
있습니다.
without full
하지만
lockdown
디지털
thanks to digital
혁명이 아무리
technology,
글로벌
and therefore many
현상이라고
people
해도
wish to learn
국가
from
간의
Korea.
디지털 서비스에
But
대한
we need to also think
접근성이나
about the
다양성
access
그리고
to digital
사용성에는
technology,
여전히
the
큰 격차가
availability of digital
존재합니다.
technology,
그래서
because we see that there
기술은
are
더
gaps
큰
between countries
불평등과
and even
정보
within
격차를
countries, and
야기할
therefore
위험이 있습니다.
technology has the danger
신기술은 또한
of leading
점점
to bigger
더 기술과
inequalities.
상호
New
보완적일 수 있는
technologies
일자리 기술이
will
요구됩니다.
lead to the
그렇게
creation
되면
of new jobs that
디지털
call for the
경제에서
use
요구되는
of such
기술을 갖춘
technology.
사람들과
And so
그렇지
those
못한
with
사람들
such
사이의
technologies and those
양극화는
without
더욱
those
심화되고
technologies
세계가
will
함께 공동으로
actually
노력하지
drift
않으면
further apart.
세계
And
각국의
so if the world
빈곤층은
does not work
더욱
together,
취약하고
then
선진국과의
the
격차는
poverty
벌어질
groups
수밖에 없습니다.
will continue to be
하지만 세계
isolated
인구의
in
절반이
each of their
인터넷을
areas.
사용하고 있지만
Currently, half of the
최빈국에서의
people in the
보급률은
world are using
15%
the
정도밖에
internet,
안
but
됩니다.
for the low-income
7명 중
countries,
1명이
only
인터넷
15% have
접근성이
access
있다는
to the
이야기입니다.
internet. Only 1 in 7
이러한
have
디지털
access.
격차를 줄이기 위해
In order to
아직도
bridge the digital
국제사회가 해야 할
divide,
일이
there are so many
많습니다.
things that the international
급속히
community
변화하는
must
일자리
continue to
환경
do.
속에서 기술을
Amidst
통해
the
새로운
rapidly
기회를 잡을
changing
수
job
있도록
environment, we need to
디지털
make
기술
sure
교육이
that we
요구됩니다.
provide digital
디지털 포용성에
education
대한
so that people
다양한
can
장벽을
join
해소하고
the group of
포용적
people
기술
who
전환을
have
위해서
jobs with digital
디지털 격차를
technologies.
좁혀 나가야
We
합니다.
need to bridge the
그렇기
digital
위해서
divide
우리는
for inclusive
창업가,
growth.
스타트업들과
We need to
협업하고
work with startups
개발도상국에
and we
혁신적인
need
기술
to
기반
provide
솔루션을 제공할 수 있어야
innovative
합니다.
technology
또한
solutions to developing
SDG를
countries.
달성을 위해서
In order to
보다
achieve the
그린하고
SDGs,
탄력적인
we need to be
지속
greener
가능한 녹색
and we need
성장으로
to make
전환해야
sure that
합니다.
we switch to
해당
sustainable growth.
SDG는
This
건강하고 안전한
SDG
물 관리 위한
calls for
SDG
healthy and
6번
clean water
에너지의
management,
친환경적
which is
생산과
number
소비에
6,
대한
and
SDG 7번
SDG 7
지속
related
가능한
to
도시와
clean
거주지에
energy,
대한
as well
SDG
as
11번
SDG
지속
11
가능한
related
생산과
to
소비에 대한
sustainable
SDG
cities,
12번
and SDG
기후변화
12
대응에
concerning
대한
sustainable
SDG
and clean consumption,
13번
and
해양
13
생태계
concerning
보존에
climate
대한
change,
SDG
and
14번
14
그리고
concerning
육상
maritime
생태계 보존에
environment,
대한
as well
SDG
as
15번이 있습니다.
15 concerning the
친환경적
preservation
에너지,
of land
물,
ecosystems.
도시개발, 그리고
So, clean
기후변화
water,
대응 등
sustainable
SDG의
growth,
다양한 분야의
urban
혁신적인
development are
기술이
just some of
요구됩니다.
the areas
제가 오늘
where
강조한 두 가지
innovative
영역인
technologies are
디지털 및
necessary for the
녹색
achievement of
어젠다는 또한
SDGs.
세계은행의
Digital
핵심적인
innovation and green
어젠다이며
innovation are the
또한
core
세계은행
agendas
국
for
한국
World Bank,
사무소가
and
중점을 두는
this is
분야입니다.
something that we focus on
하지만
at the Korea office as
세계은행이
well.
단독으로 할
World
수는
Bank cannot
없습니다.
achieve these goals
국제적인 개발
alone.
협력은 글로벌
International
개발 과제를
development
극복하고
cooperation
지속
are
가능한 개발
necessary
목표를
in order
달성하는데
to make sure
필수적입니다.
that we achieve the
개발 협력에서
SDGs.
한국은 다자간
In
대화와
development
글로벌
cooperation,
연합에서
Korea actively
주도적인 역할을 할
participates
수
in
있다고
multilateral
생각합니다.
dialogue,
특히
and I believe that you can
한국은
play a leading
혁신과
role.
기술 분야에서
Especially in
글로벌
terms of
리더이자
innovation and
국제 개발에
technology,
떠오르는
Korea is a leader,
원조 공유국이기
and we are a
때문입니다.
rising star
한국의
in the
뉴딜과
world of
2050년
ODA.
탄소
Korea's
중립
New Deal
서약은
and the
녹색
announcement
및
for
지속
zero
가능한
carbon by
성장의 리더가
2050
되고자 하는
means that Korea
한국의
can become a leader
의지를
in
보여줍니다.
green growth
한국은
and
디지털 및
green
녹색
innovation.
의제에 대한 세계은행
Korea
그룹의 중요한 개발
is an
파트너입니다.
important development partner for
기획재정부의
the
지원을 받는
SDGs and digital
세계은행 한국
innovation and green
사무소는
innovation.
디지털 및
The
녹색
Korea
혁신에
office,
관한
supported by the
세계은행과
Ministry of
한국의 파트너십의
Trade,
중심에
Industry, and
있습니다.
Energy is
한국
at the
사무소는
center of the
개도국의
partnership with Korea.
혁신과
The Korea
기술을 지원하기
office
위해서
will
Disruptive
work to
Technologies for
provide
Development
destructive technologies for
Program,
development
Technology
program
and Innovation
to
Lab,
the
글로벌
developing
혁신
countries
성장 포럼과
and the
같은
development
다양한
technology
프로그램을
lab.
운영하고 있습니다. 이 모든
And
활동들은
all of these
과학기술정책연구원,
activities are
한국개발연구원,
conducted with
수도권 매립지 관리공사,
STEPI, KDI,
한국국토정보공사,
the Korea Land
한국산업인력공단과
Information
같은
Corporation
한국
and the
기관들과의
Korea
파트너십을
Industry
통해
Corporation. These
이루어졌습니다.
partnerships are
기획재정부,
valuable. The Ministry of
과학기술정보통신부,
Finance and Planning,
국토교통부와
the Ministry
같은
of Science and
주요
ICT, the Ministry of
부처들과도
Land
긴밀한
Infrastructure and
협력을 통해 일하고
Transportation
있습니다.
are the
올해
major
한국
ministries that we are
사무소는
working with.
코로나에
This year,
대한 새로운
the Korea
파트너십을
office
시작하여
started a new
전염병 대비
partnership
및
related to
대응에 대한
COVID-19
협업,
to conduct
지식교환
collaboration
및 기술
and
지원을 위한
technology
새로운
support,
글로벌
as well
플랫폼을
as knowledge
구축했습니다.
transfer related to
한국으로부터의
disease
교훈을
control.
통해 이
Based on lessons
플랫폼은
from Korea,
혁신과
this
기술의 사용을
platform
강조하고
will
있습니다.
emphasize the
저희
use
한국
of innovation
사무소는
and technology.
팬데믹
The
이후의
Korea
회복을
office
촉진하고
wishes
개발
to
도상국이
facilitate the
보다 나은
recovery
재건을
after
할 수 있도록
COVID-19
한국 정부와
and
계속
also
협력을
strive for
강화할
better
준비가 되어
recovery in
있습니다.
developing countries
한국
with the
사무소가
partnership
다각적인
with
협력을
Korea.
통해
Through
정부와 민간 및
multifaceted
근로자들이 혁신
cooperation at the
기술에
Korea office,
적응하도록 돕고
we hope to
새로운
support
경제에서
the
번창할 수
vulnerable
있도록
groups to adjust
지원하겠습니다.
to the new digital
그리고
world so
이것이
that we can
SDG
have
이행을
joint
진전시키는
prosperity. We
가장
believe
최적의
that this would be
방법이라고
the best way
확신합니다.
to advance
경청해 주셔서
SDGs.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much
남은
for your
컨퍼런스 기간
attention. I
동안
wish you
유의미하고
the
생산적인 토론
best of luck for the
기대하겠습니다.
remainder of the
감사합니다.
conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was the keynote presentation by Mr. Seo-Hoon Sup from the World Bank Korea office. Now, I am going to invite President Cho Hwang-hee of STI for his opening remarks. President Cho has been leading international cooperation at STI. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
During the morning, I had to participate in a conference headed by the Prime Minister, and due to the active discussion of the ministers, the meeting was delayed by 20 minutes. Excuse me for my belated arrival. As I've been introduced, I am Cho Hwang-hee, President of STI. First of all, thank you very much for your participation despite your busy schedules. At today's conference, we have invited Professor Kim Eun-mi as well as Mr. Seo-Hoon Sup of World Bank Korea office. Thank you for your participation, and thank you to the presenters and discussants. At the UN General Assembly Summit for Sustainable Development, STI has been designated as one of the important tools, and so STI has become an important issue for SDGs. STI for SDGs is an important opportunity for Korea, which achieved economic growth based on technology. Many countries are still in the process of coming up with policies for STIs for SDGs, and they wish to collaborate with Korea. And therefore, at this conference where we are discussing the meaning of STI for SDGs is even more meaningful. Especially at today's conference, we hope to take a look at the opportunities and tasks for STI for SDGs, including STEM education and digital innovation. The STI will continue to support the scientific development of Korea, and through continuous partnerships with relevant organizations, we hope to lead the agenda for STI for SDGs. We look forward to your interest and cooperation. Thank you very much for your participation today.
Thank you very much, President Cho, for your opening remarks. This is the end of the opening ceremony of the session. We will now move on to the presentation and discussion session. And here, I'm going to invite Mr. Chang Yong-seok, who will moderate the presentation and the discussion session. I'm going to invite all the presenters and the discussants to come up to the stage.
네, 안녕하십니까.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As has been introduced, I am Chang Yong-seok.
당선인 신분입니다.
I am actually an chair-elect, and I am also a member of the OECD CSTP.
좋은 말씀 해주신
There were wonderful remarks made during the opening ceremony President to be Professor Kim Eun-mi, as well as President Cho Hwang-hee. Thank you very much for your remarks. Also, there was a keynote presentation by Mr. So Hoon-sup from World Bank Korea office. Thank you very much.
STI for SDG.
The title of the session is STI for the SDGs. As you know, the SDGs are Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the UN.
여기에 과학기술 혁신이
And here, in achieving SDGs, science and technology has a very big role to play.
간단하게
And before we discuss this topic, I'd like to make some remarks. Last month at the OECD, as we are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, they discussed how we should respond to this, and there was a high-level meeting at the OECD to address this important topic. And there at the meeting, there were two key messages.
이런 글로벌 위기
First of all, as we are faced with the global crisis,
여지없이 드러났다.
we realize the importance of utilizing science, technology, and innovation in addressing this massive global crisis.
그것이
We have been utilizing science and technology in order to respond to this COVID-19 pandemic, and thanks to science and technology, we were able to overcome many of the limitations. The second message was the following. Not only do we need to continue to utilize science and technology, but also we need to make this as an opportunity to implement a framework shift.
아주 유의미한
So in that sense, I believe that this session is very meaningful and timely.
더 이상 지체하지
Without
않고
further ado,
발표를
I am going to invite the presentations, and then we will have the panel discussion.
오늘 모신 분들은 뭐
Here
자세한
with
소개가
us,
필요 없을 것 같습니다.
we have wonderful experts. They don't need further introduction because they're well established in their respective fields. So I will not
다만
give you a detailed introduction, but this is how the session will be organized.
과학기술 혁신
First of all,
이 정책을 개발 협력의 관점에서
we will
그리고
hear about the presentation on the policy side,
교육이라는 측면에서
and then there will be a presentation on the educational aspect, and then there will be a presentation on how we can connect this to digital innovation. And then we have three designated
제일
discussants.
먼저 발표를 해주실 선인경
The first presenter is Dr. Sun In-kyung from STEPI. Please go ahead.
10분
I'll give you 10 minutes. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sun In-kyung, in charge of Development Cooperation Research. I am going to share with you some research findings related to the global trend of STI development cooperation in the SDGs era. I'm very happy to be able to speak with you. First of all, since 2016, the SDGs have been adopted and carried out. You can see the objective, the main areas, and the key stakeholders. Domestically, for the past 10 years, there has been a growing attention to ODAs, and the relevant budgets have increased as well. Now, the developing countries want to understand and learn from Korea as to our science and technology capabilities, and there has been an increase in the demand for Korea's ODA. So in 2018, at the Ministry of Science and ICT, they announced a plan to promote ODA on science and technology. And in 2019, together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the comprehensive plan was announced. As we're going through the pandemic in Korea, even though there was some difficulties in terms of financial resources, the comprehensive ODA support was to be increased, focusing on Korea's disease control and response. Now, Let me focus more on how the STI application for SDGs has been implemented. As you may know, SDGs not only include developing countries but also developed world. And the SDGs are aimed at addressing the global challenges, and therefore there are many cases where advanced technology is applied. And we need experts and professionals utilizing new technology, and they reside in the private sector and the science and research institutes. So there is a growing emphasis on the role that these stakeholders can play. You can see the TFM, which is Technology Facilitation Mechanism, and this is being operated within the UN framework. As you can see on the screen, there are 10 work streams. On the right-hand side at the bottom, there is work stream number 10, which is about new technology. This is a newly added work stream for TFM. STI for SDGs, as you can imagine from this title, what it means is that STI is utilized as key tools to achieve the SDGs in the global community. And there are a series of activities that are taking place in this regard. And there are many stakeholders that are playing a key role. In order to revitalize the STI for SDGs, the Ministry of Science and ICT has to play a big role. Therefore, when we discuss the STI for the SDGs, and in order to have a comprehensive understanding, we need to understand the connection between STI and SDGs. In the past, we approached STI from the development cooperation perspective, but now we put priority on the STI. So we examine STI activities and see which of these activities can be utilized for development cooperation. So now the approach has been changed. So in my research team, in order to understand what it means to utilize STI for SDGs, we wanted to understand the global trends and identify the emerging signals. We wanted to know what new trends are emerging in the global community in terms of utilizing STI for the SDGs. In other words, we wanted to identify what types of STI are being discussed and what new actors are emerging. And we conducted an analysis on 30 different aspects. We conducted interviews with professionals and experts, and we also did data analysis. Here, you can see various projects by World Bank, and then the AI for SDG project by the UN. Also, there are various projects by World Economic Forum in the Fourth Industrial Revolution Committee. There were many projects where STI is being utilized. And the PREDICT project carried out by USAID were included in our research. And we analyzed all of these projects from the perspective of STI by looking at their objectives, target audience, expected benefits, the execution plans, STI's role, and stakeholders. Because STI for SDGs itself is a very comprehensive concept, and within STI, and also there are 17 SDGs, they are very much cross-cutting. Therefore, in utilizing STI for the SDGs, it sounds very good, it's a good idea, but when it comes to the specifics of where you can start and how you can utilize that STI for the SDGs, it may be quite challenging. So we came up with a conceptual framework. Here, we put the STI at the center. And there are 4 main objectives for STIs. First, producing scientific knowledge and developing technology. That's the primary objective of STI activities. And this is mainly in line with the ministry and the government's R&D policies. And through technology development, we will be able to grow the economy. And this is in line with the industry policies and innovation policies. And when STI activities are used for international assistance, they have been included as part of the diplomacy and diplomatic activities. And recently, there is a growing understanding that STI has to be used for global challenge response. So STI is now included in our efforts to address the global challenges. And then we looked at the expected benefits and impacts and the target countries. And as we're trying to understand the meaning of STIs for the SDGs, STI is not just about providing technology solutions to address a particular challenge, but it is also about promoting humanitarian assistance and economic and social development. So we want STI to have a comprehensive impact so that all of these routes and pathways can be utilized to promote the SDGs. In all these different pathways, you can see that there are different roles that STI can play. First of all, STI can provide solutions, or STIs can be used as tools for humanitarian assistance and social and economic development, so it is making an indirect contribution to sustainable development. And for another pathway, you can see that STI is a source of information for scientific research. So in my research team, what we were trying to do was to identify these different pathways, and there are different keywords and different roles that STI can play in implementing the SDGs. For instance, as for humanitarian assistance, how can STI be used as a tool? For instance, in the ODA projects, there was this one issue that has not been resolved successfully, which was about promoting transparency in the use of financial resources. But now, utilizing the blockchain technology, we can ensure transparency in the financing, and this was also promoting efficacy of the project. And also in the developing countries, there was lack of census data for the population, and it was very difficult to create a project based on evidence. But now with machine learning and other technology solutions, we can put together census information based on the available data, and this is contributing to designing evidence-based projects for assistance. Also, when it comes to industrial development and scientific development, how can STI be used as a tool? There's a drone project in Rwanda, and in WR Congo, there is this blockchain technology project for cobalt production. As you can see here, in the developing countries, businesses can utilize these advanced technology to contribute to their domestic economic development. And this is another indirect way of contributing to the SDGs. So what I want to say is that there are different pathways and different roles that STI can play. So when it comes to designing a policy for STI for SDGs, we need to understand that there are different pathways and there are differences, and we need to understand which pathways we can go. In short, in order to understand the emerging trends globally, we identify the emerging signals where new technology is applied, and we also took a look at the roles of the new actors in this framework, and we also proposed a conceptual framework. There are many policy implications from this research, but once again, I would like to say that when you are developing policies and projects for STIs for SDGs, you need to understand different pathways. Thank you for your
네,
attention.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
SDG를 위해서
In implementing the SDGs, STI will play an important role. But I didn't really know that there could be many different multiple pathways in which STI can contribute to implementing the SDGs. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. And based on that, let's move on to the second presentation.
So against the backdrop of the first presentation, let's go on to the presentation on STEM education for SDGs, focused on treachery education. So we will invite Mr. Lee Jong-il, who is the president of the Korea Society for Innovation and Economics. As I've been introduced, I am the chairman of the Korean Society for Innovation, Management, and Economics. My name is Lee Jong-il. Well, since I became the chairman, I have conducted various activities, and I have this renewed recognition of the importance of education. It's not just because I am a professor, but I believe that education is the most important. Every evening, our family gathers together, and the five of us, we talk and eat with delivery food. I think we're all probably the same. And I'm able to teach my children, which I haven't been able to do before. And looking at the slides that I have prepared, I thought it would have been great if I had conducted STEAM education for my children. If you take a look at my slides, it's quite colorful. I asked my employee in her early 20s to create my slides, and I could have done it myself, but I wanted it to be created by a younger person. So I gave her all of my ideas, but the slides themselves were put together by our employee in her 20s. It's quite fresh and creative, but I did not want it to be too innovative. So since I was the final editor, I take full responsibility for the final product. So as you're well aware, the COVID-19 is very serious. I looked with my phone, and it's currently 68 million people, and already deaths have increased to 1.6 million. If we take a look at the history, during the Middle Ages, there was the plague, and at that time, there was not any sure statistics, but it was about 100 million people who died. During the Spain flu from 1900 to 1910, thousands of people died, and so we don't really have written records at that time. And then we go to the Vietnam War, where about 1.5 million people died, and during the Korean War, 5 million people died. It was 60 years ago, or 600 years ago, or 100 years ago, when these mass deaths happened. Given the modern health systems and the development of science, there has not been an incident where 1.5 million people died, including civilians. And so that really shakes the very root of our society. Many people talk about Industry 4.0. As you're well aware, we went through the first, second, third, and fourth industrial revolution. The issue is that we always misunderstand that the results of the first industrial revolution do not exist, and we only live off the final product and conditions of the fourth industrial revolution. That is not true. If you go to Africa, if you go to parts of Asia, there are countries that have yet to achieve the first industrial revolution. There are people who are still not benefiting from the first industrial revolution. Mr. So of World Bank also mentioned this. Well, due to the time constraint, I will not be able to go into the details. If you turn your eyes to inside Korea, I mentioned how important education is at the beginning of my presentation. We have new perspectives about education, and it's changing very quickly. It has already changed, but we're not accepting that it changes. For example, the number of students who are graduating from high school is less than the total number of students that the universities want to attract. I was born in 1960, so I am 20 years old times 3 already. In the next 5 years, we will take up the largest portion of the population. If we ask all of us to stay home and live off pension, can the people in their 20s and 30s support all of us? The platform for education is tumbling down. If we turn our eyes to outside of Korea, the education market, well, in Korea, if we think about education market, we always think about these private academies. But outside of Korea, in most countries, we already have the formation of an education market. Although we do not want to recognize this in Korea, we don't have enough students in Korea to fill all of the universities. So we are actually accepting tens of thousands of foreign students to come to Korea. So what does education teach? I think we always think about how we should just teach, that it's simple, but actually education is teaching problem solving. In the past, we had wise men and the government who presented what people should learn. For example, learn a certain way of calculation, learn 10,000 Chinese characters, and if you did that, you could have a job. But that does not happen today. In order to find the solution, you need to know the prerequisite for the problem itself. That in itself is changing. When I was born in 1960, you just had to study what you were given. And so all of the professors, we always say, it's easiest to be a professor because you just have to memorize and study. But we're past the era where everything is solved by memorizing. Designers, chefs, esports game players, they are in the limelight, and people look up to them and they love them. We need to realize why this happens. The global value chain, science and technology, and platformation, that's the world that we're going to live in. The role of libraries need to change. If we go to the libraries in Israel, I was really shocked when I went myself. They're so loud there. They don't read, but they discuss. Our problem-solving methods haven't changed. If you take a look at these pictures, I'm always very upset because of these pictures. So we have actions by specific religions and specific regulators. We see that their activities are the same today as they were in the 1960s. So, in a nutshell, the private sector and the public sector overcame the difficulties in the era of efficiency and came up with a system. And the whole world complements our systems. But now we are going through the second valley. This is the valley that we need to overcome in order to go close to creativity. And so, that is why I would like to propose STEAM. In the past, we talked about STEM. STEM is about what and how. It was about efficiency. But now we need to think about the why. And we need to take into consideration the educational environment, platform businesses, and the younger generation, and the fourth industrial revolution. And that is why we have to think about the why and by whom. We need to think about for whom we are working and studying. Already, it's difficult for me to go into the details, but during the last year, there was an experiment, and it was welcomed. And we were introduced in the media, and we have a great direction. So, what is our environment like? We conduct ODAs. As you're well aware, ever since the Korean War, we grew from the poorest country in the world to become a OECD member country. That's the first. And on the right, this is scenes from our university students going overseas to conduct ODA activities. I believe that we need to have a new K-wave, which is STEAM education, so that we can contribute to the achievement of SDGs. Due to the time constraint, I would like to mention only one thing. On TV, we already have robot wars. And with Parasite, we were in the limelight. Role is a game that is being played by people all over the world. My 3 children always played role on their computers together. Here we have Army. If you don't know what Army is, then you have to ask someone who is younger than you. Army is the fan club of BTS. Fans from 50 countries are joining Army, and each country has their own logo. This is an achievement by the private sector and the public sector together. So this is the partnership. In the past, we would provide food or receive food like we did. And then we provided money, then we provide infrastructure. But now we need to develop human resources for shared prosperity. That's what we need to lead. In Africa, they say, it takes a whole earth village to raise a child. Well, I actually created this saying because the actual saying is it makes a whole village to raise a child. I added the word earth. Korea, when we take everything into consideration, millions of things into consideration, then what we need to do is to overcome our differences and play a role for the whole world. That is creating global STEAM to contribute to the world. STEPI is the host of this session and the president of STEPI here today. I think I'm giving you a heavy agenda. We need the whole earth village to raise our children. We need research institutes, we need people like myself, we need the government, we need private companies, we need scientists, we need engineers. We need to work all together. We need to become a crowd, very appropriate for the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairman Lee, for your presentation. Yes, science and technology innovation in the end is knowledge. And in the end, knowledge can be shared through education. And so thank you for pointing that out to us. So science, math are included in STEAM along with art. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Next, I'm going to invite the third presenter, Professor Park Kyung-ryul from KAIST. He's going to be discussing digital innovation and SDGs, new possibilities and tasks. Please go ahead. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I am teaching technology policy and sustainable technology, and I am from KAIST. Thank you very much for your invitation. Despite many challenges, the organizers have put together this wonderful event. Thank you very much. I'll be the last presenter. The previous two presentations were really interesting. I'm going to discuss new possibilities and challenges related to digital innovation and the SDGs. As you may know, science and technology was used for the Marshall Plan, and in the neoclassical economic models, science and technology has been recognized as a key driving force behind economic growth. So it has been understood and researched in the academia. But when it comes to international development assistance, ICT has not been included actively. So I believe that the session is very timely and meaningful. When you think about development assistance from the field perspective of the field, ICT is really important. Now, because of the COVID-19, we have a low level of mobility. And in these circumstances, how can we still promote international development for an assistance? And in that sense, I believe that we need to discuss digital transformation and digital transition. But when it comes to the ODA framework, in theory, ICT for development has been discussed by researchers and academia. I understand that I need to conclude my presentation by 12:05, but it's already 12:05, so we are running quite behind the schedule. The previous presenter talked about disruptive innovation, so I like to be rather disruptive in my presentation and jump to the conclusion. And then, after giving you my conclusion, I'd like to mention two key tasks that we need to carry out and their implications for Korea so that I can finish my presentation briefly. First of all, as I mentioned before, for the past 3 decades, digital technology, as Dr. Chung mentioned, was mainly understood as ICT for development and knowledge for development and appropriate technology concept. And these were the previous discussions. In particular, ICT has not only economic implications, but implications for social development. So there were some previous studies on this. In addition, compared to the past digital technology, how is digital innovation different? Of course, we have maximum optimization of time and space, and we not only have a couple of nodes, but also because of the IoT, we will have multiple sensors that produce data, and we can utilize the data from all these different sources. Also, we need to take into account the differences in international and institutional level. In the past, ICT and digital innovation was used for national development, so it was mainly at the national level, and the target was the national development. But now with social media and smartphone penetration, there are increasing number of beneficiaries and there are more opportunities being created. So now we can target a particular community and we can target individuals. And when it comes to the information processing in terms of speed and processing volume, there has been a dramatic improvement. So in conclusion, I want to say that digital innovation, which was considered as a tool, is not the case anymore because digital innovation is now a constant factor that can lead to process innovation for development assistance as well. So this is going to be a constant factor in ODA. These are the 5 areas that I focus on. First of all, from the perspective of digital innovation and transformation, the key is, of course, data. We're now able to collect many different kinds of data that we were not able to collect in the past. And secondly, we have technology that can process data. And number 3, there are many different stakeholders involved in this process. And number 4, when you think about ICT for development, many projects have been quite unsuccessful. because in the past, it was more about the one-way injection or introduction of new technology. But now we have a better understanding that the local context of development in the recipient countries is crucial. Now, number 5 is global partnership, as we have many different stakeholders who are forming global partnership. So that has been my conclusion. Next, I want to discuss some possibilities based on data and machine learning. Dr. Sun In-kyung already mentioned in the presentation, but when I worked in India from 2007 to 2008, there was a randomized control testing, and we had to visit individual households, and we still are doing it this way. And since 2010, when I worked at the Innovation Lab in Kenya, Nairobi, there was the urban slum called Kibera, and there we utilized mobile phones to collect geographic information, and it was basically an open base map. And as Dr. Sun mentioned, now for the past 10 years, there has been a huge improvement in the satellite imagery. So at the KAIST lab, we're conducting joint research with Dr. Sun. By utilizing satellite image information, we are able to support development assistance activities, which used to be quite costly, but now it's much cheaper. Secondly, when you think about digital innovation, it's not just about applying technology and spreading it, but it is also about helping the recipient countries so that they can fundamentally transform the processes. In 2010, the World Bank Open Data Initiative was announced, and it was an ambitious plan. Until then, they had to pay for the data. At that time, the World Bank had data from 30,000 places, and the mapping initiative was carried out, and the data became open to the public. It is crucial to have open data source because in the past there was lack of transparency, which was a concern, and we were not able to get access to what other institutions were doing, so there was much redundancy. And in Malawi, we conducted a pilot project, and we were in the process of spreading this project to other parts. And in conclusion, this was rather a beautiful failure. In terms of continuing on with this project, we were not utilizing machine learning and sensor data, but it was based on manpower. Therefore, this model was not very sustainable. But nevertheless, this was a valuable opportunity. We were able to see that many public organizations utilized the open data for the past 10 years. So, in the field, there are possibilities for innovation in terms of their organization. Now, moving on to future tasks. As Dr. Sun mentioned, there are many expectations upon the ICT, and one of them is leapfrogging from 2G to 4G, from fixed line to mobile without going through the wired connection. But this is the kind of data that I was waiting for. There was gender divide in terms of internet access. In the middle-income countries and advanced countries, and in the CIS countries, the gender gap became narrower. But as you can see, in the sub-Saharan Africa, the gender gap or the gender divide became wider. Therefore, digital innovation will not only may end up widening the existing inequality or divide. So this is something that we need to consider and be cautious about. In other words, we need to understand potential implications of utilizing ICT and digital innovation that may lead to some negative consequences. Another important topic is that ICT is a cross-cutting issue, so it is very hard to capture statistics. And in terms of cooperation for the SDGs, it has to be based on ICT and based on evidence, and this is more like a change in our approach to the SDG implementation. Let me skip some of these slides. And finally, there are some policy implications for Korea. So far, in terms of ICT and science and technology ODA, and in terms of statistics, in terms of norm setting, the South Korean government has not been very active in terms of their participation. There were norms set by the advanced countries, but rather than following these norms, I believe that Korea has to play an active role in participating in the process of setting the norms from the beginning so that we can provide policy feedback on these international discourses. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
네, 감사합니다. 박경영
Thank you very much, Professor Park.
지금 지난 한 10여 년 이상
Well, during the last 10 years or so, we have been focused on digital technology, which is changing the world. And it seems that the pace will pick up so that digital transformation is very difficult to imagine how advanced it will become.
그런 상황 하에서
And so given this situation, ICT
얼마나 중요한 위치에
is indeed very important for international development and ODA. So this brings us to the end of all of the presentations. We will go on to the discussion portion of our dialogue. We will take about 25 minutes for the discussion.
모시겠습니다.
We will invite 3 designated discussants. First, we have with us Mr. Han Jun-hee of the Ministry of Science and ICT. He's in charge of Africa and Europe,
이 ODA 사업에
especially concerning ODAs. He is very passionate.
지금 연결이 되어 있는지 모르겠습니다.
Is he connected?
예, 안녕하십니까.
네.
과학기술정보통신부에서 ODA를
Good morning. I am Han Jun-hee at the Ministry of Science and ICT.
5분에서 10
For about 5 to 7 minutes, possibly 8, could you speak?
STI라고 지금 되어 있는 것이
So,
기존에는 하나의 그
STI in the past were thought to be tools,
현재 이제 코비드 사건
but with COVID-19,
SDGs가 이제 본격적으로
it seems that
패러다임이 되면서
SDGs have become a new development paradigm, and so STIs are in the limelight along with SDGs.
정책적을 담당하다 보니까
For me, I'm in charge of policies,
ODA와 관련된
and in particular, I am approaching SDGs from the perspective of ODA. In the field of STI,
정의가 되어 있지 않은 것 같고
I don't think we have well-defined policies, nor do we have sufficient statistics.
이제 그 과학기술정통부뿐만
At the
아니라
same time,
학교에서도 모두 이제 과학기술과 관련된
we see
개발 협력을 진행하고 있는데
that
이에 대해서는 이제
development cooperation is ongoing in many ministries, and so it is quite fragmented.
그다음에는 이제 아무래도 개발 협력에 대해서 대중들이
Concerning development cooperation, I don't think there is high awareness amongst the public. And so, science and technology experts and ICT experts, I don't think we have a lot of participation from them. There are governance concerning ODAs for different countries, and we need to think about whether our governance covers the participation of STI experts for ODA. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Science and ICT are working together to come up with new strategies to facilitate the participation of STI for SDGs.
현재로는 지금
Currently,
세계개발협력 기금법이 개정이 되면서
with the revision of the
전략
international
계획을
cooperation law,
거기에 저희가
within MOFA, or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there is a designated body that has been established, so we hope to participate in the subsection for STI. And so if that goes well, we would be able to reduce fragmentation in international cooperation, in particular for STI.
그다음에 그 STEAM 교육에 대해서
Concerning STEAM education, we had a presentation. At our ministry, one of the projects that we have is to establish an education broadcasting station in Cambodia, and it's a mobile broadcasting station. And the main contents will be STEAM education. And I think that matched the presentation by Chairman Lee. And Professor Park, as he has mentioned, with digital transformation, one of the biggest issues is digital divide. And I think that's the biggest issue. And in order to reduce the digital divide, our ministry is giving this a lot of thought. And we hope to establish a new program to reduce the digital divide, and we will surely reflect any contents that we can hear from this dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I understand that you're faced with many challenges, but I'm very happy that you're working hard with your passion. Thank you for your comments. Let's move on to Professor Jin-sang Lee from SUNY Korea for his discussion. I understand that he has extensive experiences in this field. So please go ahead. Hello. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored to be part of this panel discussion. It is indeed a very meaningful gathering, and I've been learning a lot. For the past 20 years, I've been working very closely with STEPI in promoting science and technology. I'd like to make some discussions based on my limited knowledge and understanding. When I look at the presentations that were delivered, they were mainly in the context of how we can utilize ICT for the SDGs and how Korea can make a contribution in promoting sustainable development and prosperity of the world. I believe that that is the key essence of this discussion. When it comes to global co-prosperity, it's not just the prosperity for Korea, but also to ensure that there is prosperity enjoyed by all countries around the world. So in that sense, we should be able to take the leadership in achieving this goal and what we can do specifically. And to achieve this ultimate goal of co-prosperity, we need to also help developing countries. When you look at all these countries around the world, you can understand that science and technology advancement is necessary for economic development. Maybe some city-states can be an exception, but other than that, when you are looking at some sizable economies that have sizable population and the territory, they need advancement in science and technology in order to develop their economy as well. Then how can we assist developing countries to develop their society and economy? It took 200 years for the UK to apply science and technology in their industrial development after Isaac Newton discovered physics and other theories. It took 200 or 300 years for these types of knowledge to apply for the industrial development. Now, we have existing science and technology knowledge, and Korea just adopted the existing knowledge to improve our economy in just one generation, and it took less than 20 years for China to do so. And going forward, a lot of developing countries can succeed in digital transformation quickly thanks to ICT development. And as Mr. So from the World Bank mentioned, there is digital divide, but we need to move towards digital dividend. But just like the World Bank and other UN organizations, they all want to apply digital technology for their missions. Then we can take advantage of the digital competitiveness of Korea in making contribution. There are many developing countries around the world, and Korea can help building a digital platform for these countries. We are discussing digital innovation and digital transformation, as Professor Park mentioned. And I want to add one more point, which is digital convergence. Simply put, digital convergence is about including all of the digital services in just one device, a smartphone. You can write emails, you can search information, and there are many other services and features that you can utilize in your smartphone. That is an example of digital convergence. And when you visit traditional markets, there is digital transformation of the traditional offline markets, and they're moving on to the online platform. That's another example of digital convergence. Now, the traditional markets have digital presence, so they have better efficiency. But let's go back to the basics. And once again, we need to live and we need to be fed. And to do so, we need the agricultural sector. And in agriculture, we can apply digital solutions and digital technology. Likewise, we can help developing countries apply ICT technology for their agricultural sector productivity improvement. So that is what I have in mind. Yesterday, I attended a conference via Zoom, and there at the conference, I was able to see that more than $47 billion of food imports from other countries to Africa. It means that there's so much need for food in Africa in order to feed them. And to satisfy this, we need to apply ICT and digital technology in the agricultural production. And Professor Park, you talked about disruptive innovation. Since the beginning of the 21st century, we've been experiencing postmodernism, and at that time we discussed disruptive growth and disruptive creation. And now, because everything is changing so rapidly because of COVID-19, the world is changing so rapidly, and we cannot expect or predict what would happen. And on top of that, there is advancement of AI, and there's AI for SDGs. I would like to make some more comments before I close. Stephen Hawking died a couple of years ago. He was considered the smartest scientist after Newton, and he said that maybe not in 30 years, but within 30 years, science and technology would evolve so rapidly that humans would not be able to control AI any longer, then AI may start to take over the world and the humanity may face extinction. That was a warning by Stephen Hawking. So we have to be concerned about that as well. And in that sense, of course, there are many positive benefits of using AI and science and technology, but there are potential negative consequences of scientific advancement, and we are witnessing and dealing with climate crisis as well. STEPI and other organizations and institutions will have to work together because there may be some chaos or catastrophe that we may not be able to predict right now. So we need to work really hard together. I am working hard as well, but my own effort may not be sufficient. So we all have to join hands and join forces because we need to conduct joint research. We need to share knowledge and experiences. And I hope that we will continue to interact with one another. In conclusion, I want to say that science and technology, and this has to be considered public goods. So when developing countries require technology, we should be able to provide that. As Professor Lee said, we need to also provide education and training. With that, I'd like to wrap up my discussion. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
과학기술 혁신이 퍼블릭 굿즈.
So
거기에 저는 하나 더
science and technology innovation is a public good. I would like to add global public good,
이 개발 협력 그리고
since we are talking about ODA and development cooperation.
적절한
So from that perspective, I thought that was very appropriate.
마지막 지정 토론.
Last but not least, we have with us Mr. Park Kwan-il from STI. He is in charge of multinational cooperation research.
다자 협력을 맡고 계시는
So, as long as you are in charge of multinational cooperation, could you share with us your perspective?
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
오늘 세 분의 발표
We have heard from 3 presenters, and I have been able to learn many insights. And I would like to add to this conversation.
이 STI for SDG
Thus far, concerning STI for SDGs,
많이 해왔던 것 같습니다.
we have conducted various discussions on the concept. So we need to achieve SDGs, and why is STI necessary for the achievement of SDGs? And what is STI for SDGs? We have discussed this on numerous occasions, and I think we have a global consensus concerning why we need this and how we will define it. Now is the time to think about the actual execution. What are some of the strategies and methodologies for the execution? I think we're at the stage where we need to think about this aspect. So, having said that, I look at STI for SDGs from 3 perspectives. Let me talk about them one by one. First is how to utilize STIs for achieving SDGs in Korea. To do so, we need to first take a look at where we are. SDGs that Korea wishes to achieve have already been set, and in order to achieve them, what kind of STIs would we need? How would we apply STIs to what field? That's what we need to think about at this point in time. And once we recognize which STIs we need, then we need to think about how to secure the necessary STIs. We could conduct research and development within Korea, or we could introduce technologies from overseas. And if we're going to introduce technologies from overseas, who would we cooperate through which method, and how are we going to finance this? The second perspective is for developing countries to achieve SDGs, how can we support the utilization of STIs? That's the second perspective. This is from the perspective of development cooperation. So, we need to take a look at the reality of developing countries and also take a look at what STIs are necessary for their reality. And what are the policies and systems that they need to secure the necessary STIs? The last perspective, the third perspective, would be in the process of discussing STIs for SDGs on a global scale, there are a few agenda. But what are the institutions, norms, and guidelines In that process,
참여를 해야 된다는
Korea needs to
그런
actively
생각이
participate in the dialogue.
그래서 이게
And so
예를
therefore,
들어서 최근에 이제
for
유엔
example,
차원에서 이
on the UN level,
굉장히 중요하게 다루고
they are
이
emphasizing
과정에서
STIs for
일본이
SDGs.
상당히 좀
And in that
주도권을
process,
가지고서
Japan
많은 활동을
is
하면서
leading the dialogue,
국제사회에서
and
두각을 좀 보이고
they
있는 것이
are
있었습니다.
quite
그래서
notable
우리나라도
on the
이
international
STI-에
stage.
대한 이제 관심이 이제
Well, in Korea,
생기고
we have
여러
renewed interest for
국제들이
STIs for SDGs, and many organizations are participating in the domestic dialogue. And so, how are we going to lead the agenda? How are we going to develop the agenda? And how are we going to participate in the agenda set by others? This is what we need to think about at this point in time. So from these perspectives, what do we need in common? We need international cooperation. So whether it be advanced countries, developing countries, or international organizations, we need to cooperate as an essential player. So if we continue to discuss STIs for SDGs only from the development cooperation, that would be quite limited. So we need to expand this. We need to look at this as a diplomatic activity based on science. Just like Mr. Junhee has mentioned, we need to make sure that we take a look at STIs for SDGs from the diplomatic perspective, diplomacy based on science in particular. And so it should not be left up to a certain government organization. Rather, in coming up with the strategies and the detailed tasks, as well as the necessary contents, we need to invite the participation of all government organizations and also research institutions along with universities. Last year, I participated in coming up with the strategies for diplomacy based on science, but we need to think about this once again and review it so that we come up with the details for diplomacy based on science. And in this process, STEPI, which is a part of the NRC, we hope to contribute. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your discussion.
외교의 관점에서
We need to approach science and technology from the perspective of diplomacy. That was a very valid point.
지금까지 이제 발표와
So,
지정 토론을
we heard from the three presenters and also the three designated discussants.
다양한 그런 메시지들을 저희들이
And we were able to hear many different important messages.
감히 한번
And I may try to summarize what has been discussed.
SDG라는 게 우리 앞으로 나아가야 할
The SDGs are the new goals that we need to achieve as a new value, and the global community has to work together to achieve the SDGs. And in doing so, science and technology and digital innovation will have to play a crucial role,
함께 나눠야 되는데
and this has to be shared across the world. And how can we share STIs?
얘기를 한 거였습니다.
This is something that we discussed in the session.
얼마 전도 아닙니다. 불과
Recently, I would say a couple of days ago at the OECD,
야망찬 프로젝트 하나
there was a very ambitious project initiated by OECD, STI for Digital, Green,
인클루시브
Inclusive,
퓨처리라고
Future
얘기를
is the title of this ambitious project.
타이틀 안에 모든 게 들어가 있죠.
I believe that everything is included in this title. Once again, digital is our new future,
세계에
and this is going to be a very different world.
그린하고
And how can we ensure that our world is green and inclusive? How can we create such a future? This is something that we all need to consider, and
들어가야 될 것인가?
the science and technology circle and the ICT field will all need to consider this.
요 분야만 있는 게 아니라
It's not just covering the STIs, but it has to be connected to education, industry, diplomacy, and many other areas. They all need to be integrated together.
그 말씀을 오늘 발표한
I believe that that was the key message delivered by the presenters and the panel members. This is the summary of the session. And now I'm going to turn back to the presenters to see if there are any additional comments, and they may also want to comment on the discussions that were made by the designated discussants. So first, who is going to go first?
사장님께서 먼저. 예.
Dr. Sun? Okay.
네, 오늘 다른 분들 두 분의 다른 토론 발표와
I enjoyed the presentations and the discussions. Thank you very much.
박한일 단장님께서 STI for SDG
Mr. Park talked about STI for SDGs that should not be limited to ODA, but also has to be approached from the perspective of diplomacy. In addition, we should approach this from the social and economic and cultural perspectives, and we need to have an integrated approach in dealing with STIs for SDGs. And as Mr. Park mentioned, there are three main approaches that we need to consider, which includes how Korea has to be active in participating in the norm-setting processes. And at the Microsoft, AI principles are being discussed, and international organizations and other entities are active in setting up norms related to artificial intelligence. And the reason for this is not just about achieving SDGs, but it is also because from the company's perspective, when they actively participate in the norm-setting process, this will benefit their business activities. As you can see in this example, as we are promoting STIs for SDGs, we need to get the participation of the ministries and the private sector as well, so that these entities will not just provide support for the developing countries, but also these will be mutually beneficial for both the donor country and the recipient country. The SDGs were adopted in 2015, so this is the time frame between 2016 and 2030. We already have spent 5 years and 10 more years are left. And for the next 10 years, for Korea to be active in this area, there should be more attention and support from the Ministry of Science and ICT. And before the year 2030, there will be discussions about beyond the SDGs, and there will be a new paradigm that will come into effect after the SDGs. And I hope that Korea will be one of the first runners in discussing this. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
SDG 지금 얘기하고 있는데
So we are talking about SDGs, but now you're talking about beyond SDGs, which is the very natural course forward. We need to prepare beforehand so that we could lead.
그러면은 다음으로
Next, we will go to
교수님.
Professor Park.
네, 아니요.
Yes, I think we should go to Professor Park.
다른 기회를 드리고요.
Yes, we will give
토론 또
you
초대드리겠습니다.
an opportunity to speak first.
그 방금 전에 선 박사님께서 말씀하셨다시피
As Dr. Sun mentioned, it was in my slide. Now it's 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are already discussions about post-2030, and within the SDGs, there were some trade-off issues. So people pointed out that the SDGs were going to be very difficult to achieve in full. As Dr. Seo mentioned, the ministry and the STEPI can provide us with some framework. And when it comes to digital transition and transformation, this can be a competitive strategy, or this can be utilized for international development cooperation. There may be some technology elements applied to developing countries, but at the same time, the designs, the algorithms, the data, and the data analyzing machine learning
필요한 여러 가지 안정
and
구조적인
also
네트워크
many
구조를
other
저희가
aspects
또
such as
나아가서는
power
기존의
supply and
산업과 글로벌
network
밸류체인에서
and
수원국이
also
어떤 차이를 하고
industrialization
있는지
and the
또
value
기술의
chain. All
저항도
these
있기
have to
때문에
be taken into
사회문화적인
account, and there
여러
may be
가지
some social
요소가
resistance
복합적으로
within the
작용하는
society
기술
of
산업
the target
시스템으로 우리가
country. So we
이해를
need to
해야 앞으로 좀
understand
더
this
의미 있는
as
작업들을
as a
만들어낼 수 있지
technology-based
않을까
society
생각합니다.
system,
감사합니다.
so that we can have a more integrated perspective.
그러면
Thank
이정희
you.
교수님.
Let's go back to Professor Lee Jong-il. Yes, excuse me. I think I got confused with the order.
제가 아까 시간 관계상
Well, due to the time constraint, I was not able to mention this. I thought everyone knew this. The difference between STEM and STEAM. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. STEAM would not be getting rid of STEM, but it's rather just adding art for A. At our university, we have the Department of Science, Computer Engineering, but we also have designers and artists for that college. The engineers, when they start to speak and when they end, they take a month to talk about a certain topic. But for artists, sometimes they end the conversation in 1 minute, sometimes it takes a full year. So we could see that they are very creative. So the artists, they are very creative in finding their solutions. They're not tied down to policies or norms. The reason why I mention this is because, as Mr. Han Jun-hee has mentioned, in Cambodia, they are building a education broadcasting station. STEM is about what and how. I'm not saying we should not do that project, not at all. It's great that we have such a program, but rather than supplying education, we need to think about the diversity and the importance of the students. In the past, everything was homogeneous, but it's now heterogeneous. So we need to take a look at new approaches. And Professor Lee Jin-sang of Sunny Korea, he mentioned that we need a global public good. I agree with that. Mr. Park talked about how we need to have a cross-governmental effort. I believe that too. Well, it's been a long time since I read the Bible, but in the Bible there is an analogy about the one who sows the seeds. You need to sow the seeds according to the need of the recipients. Sowing the seed itself should not be the goal, because then the seed will not grow. Or if you provide support for just 3 years, that is like sowing the seeds on ground covered with thorns. They will sprout, but they will not be able to grow. They will die. And if you sow on good, fertile ground, what happens? Well, the act of sowing the seed is important, but you also need to have a fence, you need to fertilize it, you need to water it, you need to make sure that you chase away the birds so they don't eat the seeds. So just like Mr. Park said, we need to have cross-governmental efforts, and that's my interpretation of that. Thank you very much. Well, we are almost out of time. I believe that I have about 3 minutes that I can use. Well, for the discussants, I will give you 1 minute each to mention anything that you would like to add. Maybe we can go to Professor Lee Jin-sang first.
There's not much I can say within 1 minute, but this is what I think. When you think about science and technology, it's not just limited to that sector. So we need a holistic approach for SDI, for SDGs. So once again, we need a holistic approach. These days in the international community, there are many different strategies that are being implemented, and I hope that we have to take them into account. I mentioned about using science and technology for agriculture, but not only that, when you look at the industrial sectors, without science and technology, industries cannot grow. But in Africa, there are 55 countries in that continent. And there's this free continental free trade area, and their trade is mainly based on agriculture. So there's not much benefit for them to have a free trade area. They need to develop their industries so that they can become competitive in their respective industries, so that there will be more trade among countries in that continent. But when you look at the European Union, you can see the benefit of having a single economic bloc, and that was what the African countries wanted to achieve. And I don't know how long it will take for them to actually get there. I understand that many countries need assistance and support for science and technology. There may be many obstacles and challenges along the way, but when the pandemic subsides, I believe that there will be a lot of requests for medicine and education and science and technology related assistance from these developing countries. And I hope that we will be prepared now so that we can help them. Thank you.
박관일 박사님.
Well, Dr. Park Kwan-il,
아까 그 비욘드
well,
SDG
someone mentioned beyond
말씀하셨는데요.
SDGs.
일단 우리가 SDG는 경제 사회
So
환경 측면에서
SDGs
목표들을 설정을 해놓은
are
거고요.
goals in society, economics, and environment, and there are many goals included. And in 2050, we have another goal, net zero. Many countries are looking to achieve net zero by 2050. Net zero is a very difficult goal to achieve. So SDGs set the quantitative goal, and the beyond SDGs should deal with the overall societal system and our mindset. We need to be able to change all of that to achieve the next level of goals. So beyond 2030 should be qualitative goals, fundamental changes that cannot be measured with numbers. Thank you very much. It seems that you have already thought about beyond SDGs. Last but not least, we will go to Mr. Han Jun-hee for your last comment. Well, just like Dr. Park mentioned, participating in the global agenda is the part that I would like to add. This is very important. And ICT and STI is the field that Korea has the biggest strength. So not only should we participate in global agenda, but we need to play the role of leading the relevant agenda. And should not be from just the Korean perspective, but we need to work together with international organizations. So I believe that that should be the goal. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
It's already time to conclude the session, so let me make some closing remarks. Today in the session, we discussed the role of STI and digital innovation for the SDGs. When you think about the SDGs, these are not just the goals for the developing countries, but also for us as well. He talked about net zero by 2050. We want to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. How can we achieve this goal? We need to think about this as well. And now, when you think about science and technology innovation, we were discussing in the context of cooperation, but this is also a tool or a means for competition. How can we promote harmony between competition and cooperation? This is another big task that we need to deal with. I hope that we will continue our discussion and dialogue on this important topic. I'm sorry that I ran out of time, but with that, this was indeed a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our moderator and our presenters, as well as our discussants. So this was the session on STI for SDGs, new opportunities and tasks. We have listened to 3 presenters and 3 discussants. Due to COVID-19, we apologize that we were not able to accept questions from the floor. We do hope that this session will contribute to the activation and facilitation of STI strive for SDGs. This brings us to the end of the session on science and technology as a part of the Global Korea Convention 2020. Thank you for your participation.